Morning. I'd like to welcome you back to our Anchored in the Word morning reflection. And I'm sorry we had to take a full week off, but my family was away, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to spend some time together as a family. And looking forward to getting into these scriptures again this week with you, and looking forward to being back with you. The passage in front of us is a passage that we looked at several weeks ago, and that is Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12. I'm going to read the section, and then I'd like to give you a couple of very simple introductory thoughts that will prepare us for the rest of the week. Here's what the text says. In the meantime, when there were numbered together an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch they trode one upon another, he began to say unto his disciples, first of all, beware ye of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hidden that shall not be known. Therefore, whatsoever ye have spoken in the darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which ye have spoken in the ear in the closets shall be proclaimed upon the housetops. Now, I know that we're going to read the entire section through verse 12, and it's a lengthy passage, so rather than reading the whole thing right now, I'd like us to pause here and just think a little bit about what Jesus is going to be saying in these verses. So the first thing I want to do is summarize the verses. The summary statement that I put together for this text is that a misguided view of God is the root of hypocrisy. And people who desire to escape this dishonest way of life must labor to grow in a healthy view of God. The reason that the Pharisees were hypocrites is ultimately because they did not view God correctly. Their view of God was a diminished view of God, and their view of self was an elevated view of self. And the way that we think about God is critical. We cannot underestimate how important it is that we think correctly about God. I think of some of the statements that we read of in church history that really emphasize the importance of our view of God. For instance, in Tozer's book, The Knowledge of the Holy, he says, and this is at the beginning of his book, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Worship is pure or base as the worshiper entertains high or low thoughts of God. For this reason, the gravest question before the church is always God himself. And the rest of that book is to talk about God's character. How we think about God is so critically important. If we have a low view of God, it affects our worship. If we have a low view of God, it affects our view of self. If we have a low view of God, we'll have a low view of the gospel. So we could take this into lots of different areas. I'll also mention what John Owen said, which is similar, but it expands it a little bit more. This is what he writes. Ignorance of God and ourselves is the greatest principle and cause for all disquietude. Now, that word disquietude is a word we don't use very often, but it has the idea of anxiety or uneasiness, internal struggles. He said most of people's internal struggles are a result of a wrong view of God and people's and ourselves. He then goes on to say this. This rises mostly not from a want of light and instruction, but from a want of consideration and application. So what Owen is saying is, it's not that God hasn't revealed himself, and it's not that we don't have access to truth. The problem is that when we have access to the truth, we don't pause and dig into it and consider it deeply and reflect on it and then personally apply it in our lives. And so this week, what we're going to be doing is we'll be talking about how our view of God is connected to this issue of hypocrisy. And ultimately, this is going to drive us to the point where we recognize we need to have a healthy view of God himself. So I hope that you'll join us this week as we dig into these scriptures and as we deal with some very important topics. And my prayer is that, Lord willing, by the end of this week, we will have been instructed well, fed well, and our lives will be thinking correctly about our Lord. Have a blessed day, and Lord willing, we'll meet again tomorrow. Bye now.